Alright, so I haven't done one of these videos in a while, but I figured I would do one, and to kind of change pace a little bit, I figured I'd tell you a story, a nice little story. Please excuse the very terrible accents that are about to take place, but it should be enjoyable. I tell it every once in a while to people, and they seem to enjoy it. If you don't, then you may need to consult a physician to see if your funny bone has been broken or has been surgically removed. With no further ado, so my freshman year of high school, I was in the band, and yes, I am a certified band geek. I was in band for 7 years, ever since middle school, and I went all through high school. Then after I graduated, I tried a little bit with community band, and that didn't seem to stick. Yeah, there were way too many egos, and, really bad. But anyway, so my freshman year of high school ended up going to England on our annual band trip, and it was the first band trip I'd ever been on, and it was the first time I'd ever been overseas, and it's actually the only time I've been overseas. It was quite an experience. We were there for about 10 days, 5 days in Hull and 5 days in London. Now, the 5 days in Hull were really, we ended up staying with a host family who had kids that went to the school where we were going to perform a concert, and we had to stay with them and basically follow them around and just see what it was like to be our age but over there. So those 5 days, they went by really well. There's another story in that, but the story I want to tell happened during the 5 nights we stayed in London. Now, after the 5 days in Hull, we ended up staying 5 days in London, and instead of staying with a host family in London, we actually stayed with we stayed with each other, but we were in a hostel. And the funny thing about that was I ended up rooming with basically 5 other guys, of which I was not necessarily friends, and it was interesting to be that one guy out and 6 guys. One of them doesn't really have anything to do with any of the other ones. But anyway, the thing about our hostel was that the band was split into 3 groups, and the first 2 groups ended up at the same hostel, which was basically a shorter distance away from everything we were going to be doing, whereas the 3rd group, which of course I ended up being in, was about half an hour away from everything, including the hostel that the other 2 groups were staying in. I don't know what happened with the planning. I don't know if they ended up with too many people, but long story short, 3rd group, we ended up having to wake up earlier, having to leave earlier, and we didn't get to do really a lot of the things that the first 2 groups ended up doing. So it was probably our 3rd or 4th night there, and the chaperones, they kind of felt bad that we weren't taking part in a lot of the things that the other 2 groups were doing. So they decided to let us go out. We didn't have any kind of performance to do, and so we had the evening free, and they let us go out and get some ice cream. Well, what started out as getting some ice cream turned out to be us hanging out downtown. Now, we got ice cream at a McDonald's of all places, and after that we went around for a bit. We walked downtown, and it was neat just to see. It was basically like a overseas, like Times Square, where we were, and it was pretty neat because you could see people playing music on the street and other sorts of things. But anyway, I get it. I digress. So after getting ice cream and after being downtown, we ended up on the tube, and as we were, there's a cat crossing. As we were, thanks Salem. As we were sitting on the tube, here we are, this group of obvious tourists, and here comes this homeless guy, and he comes up and he talks to one of the guys in our group, and he's obviously inebriated. So he goes up to one of the guys in our group and he's like, "Hey, do you remember Johnny Lennon?" And the guy in my group, he's getting, here we are, teenagers, high school, out of our element, chaperones are supposed to be, watching over us, and here comes this old guy, just weirdly asked. So here's this guy, also a freshman, and he's just like, yeah, he was really, really good. The old guy was just like, yeah, he really was. And so he starts talking up this kid, and in the middle of his talking to him, he the old guy, thanks. Stop. The old guy reaches into his trench coat, because of course this guy has to have a trench coat, and he pulls out this huge bottle of ale, and he just like chugs it, and he takes probably about a third of it. So this kid that's in our group, he's so freaked out by now, and the chaperones are trying to do their thing, but they're not really doing their thing. They're just like, oh hey, yeah, you should stop, but you not bother me. So the guy starts following this kid around, and it's really starting to freak him out. And he's like, oh, yeah, okay. And he's trying to talk to other people in our group. And the guy keeps asking him, oh, you remember Johnny Lennon and the Beatles? And they were really good. And so at one point, this big, bald guy in a leather jacket, I mean, he's just your typical thug-looking guy. He comes up to the old man, and he's like, hey, you should probably stop bothering these kids, because it's obvious that they're tourists. Gee, thanks. And also at the same time, it's illegal to drink in the public transportation. And the guy's just like, well, you wanna do something about it, you gotta fucking arrest me. So, sure enough, the next stop, the doors open, and the guy in the leather jacket just basically tackles the guy, the drunk, and pins him to the floor outside of the car, and they're on the platform, and he's got the guy on his belly, and it turns out that this guy is an undercover cop, and he flashes his badge. He's like, everything's okay, I'm a undercover officer. And so we were just like, oh my god, that was really freaky. But the best part of it was, as the guy was being handcuffed, and as the doors were closing, we could hear him say, remember Johnny Lennon! So that's quite a story. Yeah. And it's one of those really, really vivid encounters, experiences that I've ever had. And would I go back to London? Sure, yeah. Would I want to experience something like that again? Maybe. I don't know. But yeah, I figured I would share that. I thought it was a pretty funny story, and you probably don't get the same out of it as people in person would, but I hope you got something out of it, even if you got out of it the fact that I have a pretty great cat. Thank you, Salem, for your little cameo there. I've got Gallifrey up here on the other monitor. But anyway, that was my story. Hope you enjoyed it, and if you didn't, once again, please consult a local physician, because you may have lost any sense of imagination or humor. And I worry for you. Please, for the sake of the children, get that checked out.